The Ancient Wisdom by Annie Besant. We have seen that from the very beginning of his separate life, the thinker has possessed coatings of mental, astral, etheric, and dense physical matter. These form the media by which his life vibrates outward, the bridge of consciousness, as we may call it, along which all impulses from the thinker may reach the dense physical body. All impacts from the outer world may reach him, but this general use of the successive bodies as parts of the connected whole is a very different thing from the quickening of each in turn to serve a distinct vehicle of consciousness, independently of those below it. And it is this quickening of the vehicles that we have to consider now. The lowest vehicle, the dense physical body, is the first one to be brought into harmonious working order. The brain and the nervous system have to be elaborated and to be rendered delicately responsible to every thrill which is within their gamut of vibratory power. In the early stages, whilst the physical dense body is composed of the grosser kinds of matter, this gamut is extremely limited, and the physical organ of mind can respond only to the slowest vibrations sent down. It answers far more promptly, as is natural, to the impacts from the external world caused by objects similar in materials to itself. Its quickening as a vehicle of consciousness consists in its being made responsive to the vibrations that are initiated within, and the rapidity of this quickening depends on the cooperation of the lower nature with the higher, its loyal subordination of itself in the service of its inner ruler. When, after many, many life periods, it dawns upon the lower nature that it exists for the sake of the soul, that all its value depends on the help it can bring to the soul, that it can win immortality only by merging itself in the soul, then its evolution proceeds with great strides. Before this, the evolution has been unconscious. At first, the gratification of the lower nature was the object of life, and while this was a necessary preliminary for the calling out the energies of the thinker, it did nothing directly to render the body a vehicle of consciousness. The direct working upon it begins when the life of the man establishes its center in the mental body and when thought commences to dominate sensation. The exercise of the mental powers works on the brain and the nervous system, and the coarser materials are gradually expelled to make room for the finer, which can vibrate in unison with the thought vibrations sent to them. The brain becomes finer in constitution and increases by ever more complicated convolutions the amount of surface available for the coating of nervous matter adapted to response to thought vibrations. The nervous system becomes more delicately balanced, more sensitive, more alive to every thrill of mental activity, and when the recognition of its function as an instrument of the soul, spoken of above, has come, then active cooperation in performing this function sets in. The personality begins deliberately to discipline itself and to set permanent interests of the immortal individual above its own transient gratifications. It yields up the time that might be spent in the pursuit of the lower pleasures to the evolution of mental powers. Day by day, time is set apart for serious study. The brain is gladly surrendered to receive impacts from within it instead of from without, is trained to answer to consecutive thinking, and is taught to refrain from throwing up its own useless, disjointed images made by past impressions. It is taught to remain at rest when it is not wanted by its master, to answer, not to initiate vibrations. Further, some discretion and discrimination will be used as to the foodstuffs which supply the physical materials to the brain. The use of the coarser kinds will be discontinued, such as animal flesh and blood and alcohol, and pure food will build up a pure body. Gradually, the lower vibrations will find no materials capable of responding to them, and the physical body thus becomes more and more entirely a vehicle of consciousness, delicately responsive to all the thrills of thought and keenly sensitive to the vibrations sent outward by the thinker. The etheric double is so closely follows the constitution. No, let me start that sentence again. The etheric double so closely follows the constitution of the dense body that it is not necessary to study separately its purification and quickening. It does not normally serve as a separate vehicle of consciousness, but works synchronously with its dense partner, and when separated from it, either by accident or by death, it responds very feebly to the vibrations initiated within. Its function, in truth, is not to serve as a vehicle of mental consciousness, but as a vehicle of prana, of specialized life force, and its location from the denser particles to which it conveys the life currents is therefore disturbing and mischievous. The astral body is the second vehicle of consciousness to be vivified, and we've already seen changes through which it passes as it becomes organized for its work. When it is thoroughly organized, the consciousness which has hitherto worked within it, imprisoned by it, when in sleep it has left the physical body and is drifting about in the astral world, begins not only to receive impressions through it of astral objects that form the so-called dream consciousness, but also to perceive astral objects by its senses. That is, it begins to relate the impressions received to the objects which give rise to those impressions. These perceptions are at first confused, just as are the perceptions at first made by the mind through a new physical baby body, and they have to be corrected by experience. In the one case, as in the other, the thinker has gradually to discover the new powers which he can use through the subtler vehicle, and by which he can control the astral elements and defend himself against astral dangers. He is not left alone to face this new world unaided, but is taught and helped, and until he can guard himself, protected by those who are more experienced than himself in the ways of the astral world. Gradually, the new vehicle of consciousness comes completely under his control, and life on the astral plane is as natural and as familiar as life on the physical. The third vehicle of consciousness, the mental body, is rarely, if ever, vivified for independent action without the direct instruction of the teacher, and its functioning belongs to the life of the disciple at the present stage of human evolution. As we've already seen, it's rearranged for separate functioning on the mental plane, and here again experience and training are needed ere it comes fully under its owner's control. A fact common to all these three vehicles of consciousness, but more apt to mislead perhaps in the subtler than in the denser, because it is generally forgotten in their case, while it is so obvious that it is remembered in the denser, that they are subject to evolution, and that their higher evolution, and that with their higher evolution, their powers to receive and to respond to vibrations increase. How many more shades of color are seen by a trained eye than by an untrained? How many more overtones are heard by a trained ear, where the untrained hears only the single fundamental note? As the physical senses grow more keen, the world becomes fuller and fuller, where the peasant is conscious only of his furrow and his plow. The cultured mind is conscious of hedgerow, flower, and quivering aspen, of rapturously melodious down dropping from the skylark and the whirring of tiny wings through the adjoining wood, of the scudding of rabbits under the curled fronds of the bracken, and the squirrels playing with each other through the branches of the beeches, of all the gracious moments of wild things, of all the fragrant odors of field and woodland, of all the changing glories of the cloud-flecked sky, and of all the chasing lights and shadows on the hills. Both the peasant and the cultured have eyes, both have brains, but of what differing powers of observation, of what differing powers to receive impressions, thus also in other worlds. As the astral and mental bodies begin to function as separate vehicles of consciousness, they are in, as it were, the peasant stage of receptivity, and only fragments of the astral and mental worlds with their strange and elusive phenomena make their way into consciousness, but they evolve rapidly, embracing more and more and conveying to consciousness a more and more accurate reflection of its environment. Here, as everywhere else, we have to remember that our knowledge is not the limit of nature's power, and that in the astral mental worlds, as in the physical, we are still children, picking up a few shells cast up by the waves, while the treasures hid in the ocean are still unexplored. The quickening of the causal body as a vehicle of consciousness follows in due course the quickening of the mental body and opens up a man to the yet more marvelous state of consciousness, stretching backwards into an illimitable past, onwards into the reaches of the future. Then the thinker not only possesses the memory of his own past and can trace his growth through the long succession of his incarnate and excarnate lives, but he can also roam at will through the storied past of the earth and learn the weighty lessons of world experience, studying the hidden laws which guide evolution and the deep secrets of life hidden in the bosom of nature. In that lofty vehicle of consciousness, he can reach the veiled Isis and lift a corner of her down-dropped veil, for there he can face her eyes without being blinded by her lightning glances, and he can see in the radiance that flows from her the causes of the world's sorrow and its ending, with heart pitiful and compassionate, but no longer wrung with helpless pain. Strength and calm and wisdom come to those who are using the causal body as a vehicle of consciousness and who behold with opened eyes the glory of the good law. When the Buddhic body is quickened as a vehicle of consciousness, the man enters into the bliss of non-separateness and knows in full and vivid realization his unity with all that is. As the predominant element of consciousness in the causal body is knowledge and ultimately wisdom, so the predominant element in consciousness in the Buddhic body is bliss and love. The serenity of wisdom chiefly marks the one, while tenderest compassion streams forth inexhaustibly from the other. When to these is added the godlike and unruffled strength that marks the functioning of Atma, then humanity is crowned with divinity, and the God-man is manifest in all the plenitude of his power and his wisdom and his love. The handing down of the lower vehicles of such a part of consciousness belongs to the higher, as they are able to receive, does not immediately follow on the successive quickening of the vehicles. In this matter, individuals differ widely according to their circumstances and their work. For this quickening of the vehicles above the physical rarely occurs till probationary discipleship is reached, and then the duties to be discharged depend on the needs of the time. The disciple, and even the aspirant for discipleship, is taught to hold all his powers entirely for the service of the world, and sharing of the lower consciousness in the knowledge of the higher is, for the most part, determined by the needs of the work in which the disciple is engaged. It is necessary that the disciple should have the full use of his vehicles of consciousness on the higher planes. As much of his work can be accomplished only in them, but the conveying of a knowledge of that work to the physical vehicle, which is no way concerned in it, is a matter of no importance, and the conveyance of non-conveyance is generally determined by the effect that the one course or the other would have on the efficiency of his work on the physical plane. The strain on the physical body when the higher consciousness compels it to vibrate responsively is very great at the present stage of evolution. Unless the external circumstances are very favorable, this strain is apt to cause nervous disturbance, hypersensitiveness with its attendant evils. Hence, most of those who are in full possession of the quickened higher vehicles of consciousness, and those whose most important work is done out of the body, remain apart from the busy haunts of men. If they desire to throw themselves into the physical consciousness of knowledge they use on the higher planes, thus preserving the sensitive physical vehicle from the rough usage and clamor of ordinary life. The main preparations to be made for receiving in the physical vehicle of the vibrations of the higher consciousness are its purification from the grosser materials by pure food and pure life, the entire subjugation of the passions, and the cultivation of an even, balanced temper and mind, unaffected by the turmoil and vicissitudes of external life, the habit of quiet meditation on lofty topics, turning the mind away from the objects of the senses and from the mental images arising from them, and fixing it on higher things, the cessation of hurry, especially of that restless, excitable hurry of the mind, which keeps the brain continually at work and flying from one subject to another, the genuine love for things of the higher world that makes them more attractive than objects of the lower, so that the mind rests contentedly in their companionship, as in that of a well-loved friend. In fact, the preparations are much the same as those necessary for the conscious separation of the soul from the body, and those elsewhere stated by me as follows. Those who have grasped the main ideas sketched in the foregoing pages will feel that these ideas are themselves the strongest proof that reincarnation is a fact in nature. It is necessary in order that the vast evolution implied in the phrase, the evolution of the soul, may be accomplished. The only alternative, putting aside for the moment the materialistic idea that the soul is only an aggregate of the vibrations of a particular kind of physical matter, is that each soul is a new creation, made when a babe is born and stamped with virtuous or vicious tendencies, endowed with ability or with stupidity by the arbitrary whim of the creative power. As the Mohammedan would say, his fate is hung round the neck at birth. For a man's fate depends on his character and his surroundings, and a newly created soul flung into the world must be doomed to happiness or misery according to the circumstances environing him and the character stamped upon him. Predestination in its most offensive form is the alternative of reincarnation. Instead of looking on man as slowly evolving, so that the brutal savage of today will, in time, evolve the noblest qualities of saint and hero, and thus seeing in the world a wisely planned and wisely directed process of life, of growth, process of growth, we shall be obliged to see in it a chaos of most unjustly treated sentient being, awarded happiness or misery, knowledge or ignorance, virtue or vice, wealth or poverty, genius or idiocy, by an arbitrary external will, unguided by either justice or mercy, a veritable pandemonium, irrational and unmeaning. And this chaos is supposed to be the higher part of the cosmos, in the lower regions of which are manifested all the orderly and beautiful workings of the law that ever evolves higher and more complex forms from the lower, and the simpler that obviously makes for righteousness, for harmony, and for beauty, if it be admitted that the soul of the savage is destined to live and to evolve, and that he is not doomed for eternity to his present infant state, but that his evolution will take place after death and in other worlds. Then the principle of soul evolution is conceded, and the question of the place of evolution alone remains. Were all souls on earth at the same stage of evolution, much might be said for the contention that further worlds are needed for the evolution of souls beyond the infant stage. But we have around us souls that are far more advanced, and that are born with noble mental and moral qualities. By parity of reasoning, we must suppose them to have been evolved in other worlds ere their one birth in this, and we cannot but wonder why an earth that offers varied conditions fit for little developed and also for advanced souls should be paid only one flying visit by souls at every stage of development, all the rest of their evolution being carried out in worlds similar to this, equally able to afford all the conditions needed to evolve souls at different stages of evolution as we find them to when they are born here. The ancient wisdom teaches, indeed, that the soul progresses through many worlds, but it also teaches that he is born in each of these worlds over and over again until he has completed the evolution possible in that world. The worlds themselves, according to its teachings, form an evolutionary chain, and each play its own part as a field for certain stages of evolution. Our own world offers a field suitable for the evolution of the mineral, vegetable, animal, and human kingdoms, and therefore collective or individual reincarnation goes on upon it in all these kingdoms. Truly, further evolution lies before us in other worlds, but in the divine order, they are not open to us until we have learned and mastered the lessons of our own world. There are many lines of thought that lead us to the same goal of reincarnation as we study the world around us. The immense differences that separate man from man have already been noticed as implying an evolutionary past behind each soul, and attention has been drawn to these differentiating and individual reincarnations of men, all of whom belong to a single species, from the reincarnation of monadic group souls in the lower kingdoms. The comparatively small differences that separate the physical bodies of men, all being externally recognizable as men, should be contrasted with the immense differences that separate the lowest savage from the noblest human type in mental and moral capacities. Savages are all often splendid in physical development and with large cranial contents, but how different their minds from that of a philosopher or a saint. If high mental and moral qualities are regarded as the accumulated results of civilized living, then we are confronted by the fact that the ablest men of the present are overtopped by the intellectual giants of the past, and that none of our day reaches the moral attitude of some historical saints. Further, we have to consider that genius has neither parent nor child, that it appears suddenly and not as the apex of a gradually improving family. it is generally sterile, or if a child is born to it, it is a child of the body, not of the mind. Still more significantly, a musical genius is for the most part born in a musical family, because that form of genius needs for its manifestation a nervous organization of a peculiar kind, and nervousness organization falls under the law of heredity. But how often in such a family its object seems over when it has provided a body for a genius, and then it flickers out and vanishes in a few generations into the obscurity of average humanity. Where are the descendants of Bach, of Mozart, of Beethoven, Mendelssohn, equal to their sires? Truly, genius does not descend from father to son like the family physical types of the Stuart and the Bourbon. On what ground, save that of reincarnation, can the infant prodigy be accounted for? Take, for instance, the case of the child who became Dr. Young, the discoverer of the unadulterated theory of light, the man whose greatness is scarcely yet sufficiently widely recognized. As a child of 2, he could read with considerable fluency, and before he was 4, he had read through the Bible twice. At 7, he began arithmetic and mastered Wockingham's tutor's assistant in italics. So it seems to be a text, a book. Wockingham's tutor's assistant. Before he has reached the middle of it, under his tutor, and a few years later we find him mastering, while at school, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, mathematics, bookkeeping, French, Italian, telescope making, and delighting in Oriental literature. At 14, he was to be placed under private tuition with a boy a year and a half younger, but the tutor first engaged failing to arrive. Young taught the other boy. Sir William Rowan Hamilton, Rowan Hamilton, showed power even more precocious. He began to learn Hebrew when he was barely 3, and at the age of 7 he was pronounced by one of the followers of the Trinity College in Dublin to have shown a greater knowledge of the language than many candidates for a fellowship. At the age of 13, he had acquired considerable knowledge of at least 13 languages. Among these, besides the classical and the modern European languages, were included Persian, Arabic, Sanskrit, Hindustani, and even Malay, Malay. He wrote at the age of 14 a complimentary letter to the Persian ambassador, who happened to be visiting Dublin. The latter said that he had not thought there was a man in Britain who could have written such a document in the Persian language. A relative of his says, "I remember him as a little boy of 6, when he would answer a difficult mathematical question and run off gaily to his little cart. At 12, he engaged Coburn, the American calculating boy who was then being exhibited as a curiosity in Dublin, and he had not always the worst of the encounter. When he was 18, Dr. Brinkley, of the Royal Astronomer of Ireland, said of him in 1823, "This young man, I do not say will be, but is the first mathematician of his age." At college, his career was perhaps unexampled. Among a number of competitors of more than ordinary merit, he was first in every subject and in every examination. Let the thoughtful student compare these boys with a semi-idiot, or even with an average lad. Note how, starting with these advantages, they become leaders of thought, and then ask himself whether such souls have no past behind them. Family likenesses are generally explained as being due to the law of heredity, but differences in mental or moral character are continually found in family circles, and these are left unexplained. Reincarnation explains the likeliness by the fact that a soul is taking birth, that a soul in taking birth is directed to a family which provides by its physical heredity excuse me, a body suitable to express its characteristics, and it explains the unlikeliness by attaching the mental and moral character to the individual himself, while showing that ties set up in the past have led him to take birth in connection with some other individual of that family. A matter of significance in connection with twins is that during infancy they will often be indistinguishable from each other, even to the keen eye of the mother and of the nurse, whereas in later life, when Manas has been working on his physical encasement, he will have so modified it that the physical likeness lessens and the differences in character stamp themselves on the mobile features. Physical likeness with mental and moral unlikeness seems to imply the meeting of two different lines of causation. The striking dissimilarity found to exist between people of about equal intellectual power in assimilating particular kinds of knowledge is another pointer to reincarnation. A truth is recognized at once by one, while the other fails to grasp it even after long and careful observation. Yet the very opposite may be the case when another truth is presented to them, and it may seem by the second and missed by the first. Two students are attracted to Theosophy and begin to study it. At a year's end, one is familiar with the main conceptions and can apply them, while the other is struggling in a maze. To the one, each principle seemed familiar on presentation, to the other, new, unintelligible, strange. The believer in reincarnation understands that the teaching is old to the one and new to the other. One learns quickly because he remembers. He is but recovering past knowledge. The other learns slowly because his experience has not included these truths of nature, and he is acquiring them toilfully for the first time. So, ordinary intuition is merely recognition of a fact familiar in a past life, though met with for the first time in the present. Another sign of the road along which the individual has traveled in the past. The main difficulty with many people in the reception of the doctrine of reincarnation is their own absence of memory of their past. Yet they are every day familiar with the fact that they have forgotten very much even of their lives in the present bodies, and that their early years of childhood are blurred and those of infancy a blank. They must also know that events of the past, which have entirely slipped out of their normal consciousness, are yet hidden away in dark caves of memory and can be brought out again vividly in some form of disease or under the influence of mesmerism. A dying man has been known to speak a language heard only in infancy and unknown to him during his long life. In delirium, events long forgotten have presented themselves vividly to the consciousness. Nothing is really forgotten, but much is hidden out of sight of the limited vision of our waking consciousness. The most limited form of our consciousness, although the only consciousness recognized by the vast majority. Just as the memory of some of the present life is indrawn beyond the reach of the waking consciousness and makes itself known again only when the brain is hypersensitive and thus able to respond to vibrations that usually beat against it unheeded. So it is the memory of the past lives stored up out of reach of the physical consciousness. It is all with the thinker, who alone persists from life to life. He has the whole book of memory within his reach, for he is the only I that has passed through all the experiences recorded therein. Moreover, he can express his own memories of the past on his physical vehicle as soon as he has been sufficiently purified to answer to his swift and subtle vibrations. And then the man of flesh can share his knowledge of the stored past. The difficulty of memory does not lie in forgetfulness, for the lower vehicle, the physical body, has never passed through the previous lives of its owner. It lies in the absorption of the present body in its present environment, in its coarse irresponsiveness to the delicate thrills in which alone the soul can speak. Those who would remember the past must not have their interest centered in the present, and they must purify and refine the body until it's able to receive the impressions from the subtler spheres. Memory of their own past lives, however, is possessed by a considerable number of people who have achieved the necessary sensitiveness of the physical organism, and to these, of course, reincarnation is no longer a theory, but has become a matter of personal knowledge. They have learned how much richer life becomes when memories of past lives pour into it, when the friends of this brief day are found to be friends of the long ago, and old remembrances strengthen the ties of the fleeting present. Life gains security and dignity when it is seen with the long vista behind it, and when the loves of old reappear in the loves of today. Death fades into the proper place as a mere incident of life, a change from one scene to another, like a journey that separates bodies but cannot sunder friend from friend. The links of the present are found to be part of the golden chain that stretches backward, and the future can be faced with a glad security in the thought that these links will endure through days to come and form part of that unbroken chain. Now and then we find children who have brought over a memory of their immediate past, for the most part, when they have died in childhood and are reborn almost immediately. In the West, such cases are rarer than in the East, because in the West the first words of such a child would be met with disbelief, and he would quickly lose faith in his own memories. In the East, where belief in reincarnation is almost universal, the child's remembrances are listened to, and where the opportunity serves, they have been verified. There is another important point with respect to memory that will repay consideration. The memory of past events remains, as we have seen, with the thinker only. But the results of those events embodies in faculties that are at the service of the lower man. If the whole of these past events were thrown down into the physical brain, the vast mass of experiences in no classified order, without arrangement, the man would not be guided by the outcome of the past, nor utilize it for present help. Compelled to make a choice between two lines of action, he would have to pick out from the unarranged facts from his past similar events and character, trace out their results, and after long and weary study arrive at some conclusion, a conclusion very likely to be vitiated by the overlooking of some important factor, and reach long after the need for the decision has passed. All the events, trivial and important, of some hundreds of lives would form a rather unwieldy and chaotic mass for reference in an emergency that demanded a swift decision. The far more effective plan of nature leaves to the thinker the memory of the events, provides a long period of excarnate existence for the mental body during which all the events are tabulated and compared, and their results are classified. Then these results are embodied as faculties, and these faculties form the next mental body of the thinker. In this way, the enlarged and improved faculties are available for immediate use, and the results of the past being in them, a decision can can be come to in accordance with those results and without any delay. The clear, quick insight and prompt judgment are nothing else than the outcome of past experiences, molded into an effective form for use. They are surely more useful instruments than would be a mass of unassimilated experiences out of which the relevant ones would have to be selected and compared, and from which inferences would have to be drawn on each separate occasion on which the choice arises. From all these lines of thought, however, the mind turns back to rest on the fundamental necessity for reincarnation if life is to be made intelligible, and if injustice and cruelty were not to mock the helplessness of man. With reincarnation, man is a dignified, immortal being, evolving towards a divinely glorious end. Without it, he is tossing straw on the stream of chance, circumstances, irresponsible for his character, for his actions, for his destiny. With it, he may look forward with fearless hope, however low in the scale of evolution he may be today, for he is on the ladder to divinity, and the climbing to its summit is only a question of time. Without it, he has no reasonable ground for assurance as to progress in the future, nor indeed any reasonable ground for assurance in a future at all. Why should a creature without a past look forward to a future? He may be a mere bubble on the ocean of time, flung into the world of non-entity, with qualities good or evil attached to him, without reason or desert. Why should he strive to make the best of them? Will not his future, if he has one, be as isolated, as uncaused, as unrelated as his present? In dropping reincarnation from its beliefs, the modern world has deprived God of his justice and has bereft man of his security. He may be lucky or unlucky, but the strength and the dignity conferred by reliance on a changeless law are rent away from him, and he is left tossing helplessly on an unnavigable ocean of life. And that concludes Chapter 8 on reincarnation. Chapter 9 is going to be about karma. So, till soon.